This is the culture.
Welcome back to another episode of the Cinema Wave podcast. I am your host for today, Zach Miller, and I'm here with a very, very special guest, a good friend of mine, Bryan Sudfield.
Hello, Zach. Hello. Very excited to be here.
That was a stellar introduction, by the way.
Oh,
Bryan.
thanks, man. Great. I appreciate that.
I'm really happy you could
Your
swing
introduction
by.
was pretty great, too.
That was rehearsed, yeah. So it's good. But I'm really glad that you could come in. And Bryan is here to talk about the Toronto International Film Festival. He had the special honor of being on as press. So he had a great experience with that. And he's going to describe his time at the festival. But before we get into that, we want to get to know a little bit more about Bryan himself. So Bryan, let's go back like day one in diapers. Like where was your origin to film and what got you into film? What's your, these are icebreaker conversation questions. Like what is your favorite film? All these things.
Okay, so apparently according to my parents, my first word that I ever said was DVD. I wish there was evidence of me saying that as my first word. I really wish there was evidence about that, but I guess ever since I said the word DVD, the love for film just came right away. No, I've loved film my entire life. I've watched countless movies throughout my childhood into my adulthood. I would go to the movies constantly with my parents when I was a kid. Then as I got older, I would sit down to watch these celebrated movies, like many of the films that are mentioned throughout here in this little studio, like Back to the Future. Zach has a Pulp Fiction poster right behind. There's an Empire Strikes Back poster right over there. Forrest Gump and all these other things. But no, I just have always loved sitting down and escaping for however long and immersing myself into the world that this story is presenting to us. And my favorite movie of all time, it's been going back and forth a lot lately, but I'm certain that Catch Me If You Can from Steven Spielberg is my favorite film of all time. It's so ridiculous how, considering that Spielberg directed it, nobody talks about it. Considering that Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks are in it, nobody talks about it, which is really sickening in my opinion, but it's so good. And anyone listening that has not seen Catch Me If You Can, if you consider yourself a Spielberg fan, not to go off on you or anything, but if you haven't seen the movie, then I'm sorry. You're going to have to reevaluate yourself and just watch that movie immediately after you get off this podcast.
I completely agree. Catch Me If You Can is a timeless film, and I think it's one of Spielberg's most overlooked films.
It absolutely is.
So I'm really glad you gave that answer too, and I think that's a really good pick as just your overall top all time. But I know it is hard. That is a hard question to come up with, like a short answer like that. But you've also told me that you go into New York a lot to catch a lot of screenings of anniversary films or select screenings. So tell me a little bit about that too.
Yeah, when you live in a place like New Jersey, you unfortunately don't have the opportunity to see a lot of classic movies restored and brought back to theaters because, unfortunately, and Zach could agree to this, the people in New Jersey, again, no disrespect, but a lot of people in New Jersey don't care about movies like they should. If it's a Marvel movie, they'll be there day one. But if it's a movie from someone like Scorsese, for instance, they're not going to give a shit about that. Am I allowed to curse on this, by the way?
Yeah. I mean, you might as well. Yeah.
As a New Jerseyan, I feel like it's my obligation to do that as well. But no, I go into New York and I hear about all these print screens, films that show on 35 millimeter or 70 millimeter. And I like to experience certain films that I may not have seen for the first time in a theater surrounded by a crowd of film geeks. And I've told Zach this many times, but anytime I have the opportunity to go see a certain movie on the big screen in New York, I'll happily take that opportunity because I recently went to a screen of Eternal Sunshine in New York, and I've seen it many times. It's fantastic. It's a great film. But just seeing it surrounded by a crowd of actual genuine film lovers really made the experience so much better. So it's always a delight to be in an environment surrounded by people who have the same passion that you have when watching a movie.
Yeah, I think it's really nice too to have a background in, you have the accessibility to watch some of these movies at home, but there's a celebration when you go and take the time to go see the film in theaters, and to have a community like that, especially in New York, like it is all film people that are turning out for those special screenings, and those like the Angelica Film Center, the Alamo Draft House, like all those cool little niche spots. in the city. Those are like really fun to just go and appreciate a good movie and grab, that enthusiasm again that gets you into it. But what also got you into doing film journalism? Was it a sense of you just like to break down movies and then you gravitated more towards doing podcasts? And I know you had a little bit of a background in doing YouTube reviews and stuff like that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I realized that as someone who really appreciates the craft of film and just watching them and learning how they're put together and what have you, I started taking a liking towards talking about them more than I did of making them and analyzing them and studying them and what have you. But I think it's cool that there are people that are so fascinated with the concept of film that they sit down and they decide to talk about what they liked about the film, what they didn't like about the film, what could have made it better, what could have possibly made it worse. And I've been doing film journalism for almost a decade. I've podcasted for so long, and I was doing YouTube, like you said, Zach, for quite some time. And I always just got excited to go watch a movie and then just talk about it afterwards, even if it was a film that I didn't really care for. I just always loved sitting down and just discussing for a couple of minutes of why I loved the film or why I hated the film. And even though I do have a background in filmmaking, I have a degree in filmmaking, I started realizing that I'm not as interested in making films as I am talking about them.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think there's always a need for that too. It's definitely what we both do with our podcasts and stuff like that. So it's also opening that dialogue, and that goes into just art in general of why we appreciate movies and why we find subjective backgrounds in some type of movies too. Like sometimes you and I get different reactions from movies, and so will other people that we go into the theater with. And I think that's also really interesting, and something that we can both appreciate with just talking about movies and seeing movies is there's not always one definitive answer to something. And I think it's cool that journalism gives that gateway of appreciating it and then also saying this works for this reason and this didn't work for this reason. And I think that's a good collaborative medium. So tell me about your podcast specifically and what you are trying to facilitate with that.
Yeah, so I have a podcast called Film Fragments, and basically it's an average top 5 podcast where me and a guest talk about our top 5 favorite films from an actor, director, or genre of their choice. And I like to release these episodes around the time that a film related to said topic comes out. So, for example, I did an episode not too long ago on there's so many episodes I've done like I've done like 70 of them at this point. But
Wow.
a great example is that I did an episode on Hayao Miyazaki, and he has his new film coming out very, very soon. So I had someone who claimed themselves to be a big Miyazaki fan, and they were, and they got to gush with me about their favorites from the guy. And it's always fun to meet people who again have a similar passion to you, where they just gush about film. But also it's amazing just to hear about these people gush about the topics in film that they resonate with the most. So when there's someone who says, "Oh, my favorite filmmaker is Paul Thomas Anderson," you could just see the passion that they have for that guy's films. Or if someone says, "I want to talk about Kate Winslet," you could see the passion that that person has for her performances. And I've done this podcast for a year and a half, and I've gone to have so many incredible film geeks on. I've had so many great episodes that have come out of the show, so many cool topics. And it's honestly also helped me explore these filmographies of these actors and directors and even these genres and explore them in ways that I never anticipated. So I love doing Film Fragments. It's something that I'm very proud of. And, a lot of people think that podcasting isn't something that special. But if you're passionate about what it is that you do, that's the beauty of it. And I don't do this for views or money or followers. That's never been the case for me. Film Fragments has always just been about getting to meet fellow film geeks, seeing them glow about what it is that they love, and just spending an hour to 2 hours just talking with them about what they love most.
That's really special. I think that's awesome. And then the way that you time the podcast with the way that things come out and the release dates. And then I think it's also really cool that you found so many people with a niche in all of those backgrounds too.
Yeah.
Like there are so many directors and actors that you covered, and then specifically, like I remember the Disney podcast that you made of the I think it was top 5 and bottom 5 or of Disney, and or just how well the live action ones.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, so that was really cool. And then um to hear other people talk about films like from Disney, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that live action movie they made in the 2000s. I grew up with that, and it created a similar feeling of, everybody just talking and having a dialogue about what got them into film or why they appreciate this movie so much, and then you're left to think like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Or like you are familiar with the director and you've seen their stuff, but with someone gushing about it like you're saying, it's like, oh wow, that's cool, I never thought about it like that, and that's really cool that they got that takeaway from this, or those movies helped them through a specific time, and that's really cool. So I commend you for doing a project like that and doing it in fragments and highlighting cool people too. So I know they definitely appreciate that.
Thanks,
as well.
man. I appreciate
But,
that.
Yeah, no problem. And I also want to segue into your success, just getting into the press side of it now too. You're getting into more high key journalism when you're covering festivals, and you've been to a number of them so far, but you just went to TIFF, and that's like our big topic of conversation. A lot of people don't know how big, like the average Joe might not know how big festival circuits are in the film world, and TIFF is one of the biggest ones. So what was your impression of TIFF before going?
So I've dreamt of going to TIFF for as long as I can remember. The thing that's so cool about the Toronto Film Festival, and really just a lot of festivals that happen around this time of the year, like Venice, Telluride, Toronto, and New York, is that this is the place where a lot of these movies that we're going to talk about till the end of the year make their big debut and their big premieres and everything. And these are the movies that we're going to be talking about really until the Oscars happen early on in the following year. So TIFF had a lot of big titles. That's usually the case with the festival, but they also tend to be the stepping stone for a lot of smaller titles from smaller filmmakers from all over the globe. And it being based in Canada, there's a lot of Canadian storytellers there just trying to get their big break. And it's really incredible to see how this city just comes together for this one festival, and they just go so hard and they're so excited to be there to celebrate the craft of film. And just, you could just sense the energy. You could feel it just throughout every single venue. You could feel it on the streets of Toronto. And, I never thought that I would ever be able to go to this festival, and just having the opportunity to do that this year was really amazing. And it is important to note that this year of TIFF was very different from other years because of everything that's going on right now in the industry with the SAG-AFTRA strikes and the WGA strikes. So there wasn't as much talent there to promote the work, and you could definitely feel the sense being different than it usually is. Like the vibes were so much different because last year they had all these high profile titles. They had The Whale there, so Brendan Fraser was there. They had The Son, Hugh Jackman was there. The Fablemans was there, so that entire cast was there. Women Talking, like all these big titles were there, and all these actors and filmmakers involved with said projects were there. So I can understand a lot of people being disappointed if they go to a film festival just for the celebrities and everything, but it's never been that way for me. Of course, it's nice seeing the actors and filmmakers talk about their movies and promote them and what have you, but you're there to watch movies. You're there surrounded by people who love film just like you. And the thing about TIFF is that not only are you surrounded by people from the States and Canada, you're surrounded by people from all over the globe. I can tell you that I met so many people that were from Europe and Australia. I even met someone from New Zealand who works for Letterbox. It's incredible just to see how everyone comes together for this week-long festival in Canada, and you could just sense the love and the energy that's there. It's unlike any place that I've ever been to, and I had heard for years that it was the festival to go to, and I was so afraid that I wasn't going to live up to the hype, but it honestly exceeded my expectations.
Wow.
I had such a great time going, and I highly recommend anyone listening, if you're looking for a festival to go to, you should definitely try to cross TIFF off your bucket list for sure.
So you were there for how many days?
I was there for a week.
And how many films did you see?
I saw almost 30 films, 27 to be exact.
Whoa, that's like 4 a day. Or more.
That's like 4 or 5 a day. My first day, I saw 6 movies. To give you a rundown, of my very first day, my first press screen, and to keep in mind, when you go as press, you have the option to go to press screens, and you also have the option to go to public screens. So thankfully, as press, you have more leeway of attended screens because everything's scattered and what have you. And obviously, you're not going to be able to see everything. There were some films that I unfortunately didn't get around to seeing due to my time there and how it conflicted with other films that were higher priority for me. But my first press screening on day one was at 8:30 in the morning. And just to tell you, my last movie started at midnight.
Oh my
and I was at the theater from about 8:15 in the morning to about 1:45 in the morning.
No way, dude! Wow,
and
you were injecting cinema into your veins.
I really was. I mean, listen. I'll happily inject cinema in my veins until my veins don't want to take it anymore. But no, it's crazy how there are people, believe it or not, who actually end up seeing way more films in a shorter time frame than I did. Wow. Because, I like to make sure that I have time to eat, sleep.
Basic necessities.
Mostly eat, but, that's okay. Because when you go to these festivals, you're running around from screen to screen. You have very little time to just relax and take a chill pill and what have you. But, yeah, I saw about 4 to 5 movies a day. 6, that was the only day where I saw 6. I decided to go crazy on my first day, and I'm not complaining at all. I had a great time going, and I could have easily seen more films, but I told myself that I want to have time to relax. Yeah. I want to have time to hang out with people. I want to have time to sleep, mainly sleep. But even when I told myself that I was going to have time to sleep, I probably got average maybe like 4 or 5 hours of sleep every night that I was there. Oh my gosh! Wow. It was rough. It was rough. I'm not gonna lie. There was a lot of caffeine in my system. I don't even want to think about how much coffee I drank per day. Probably maybe. I'm not proud to admit this. Probably like 3 cups of coffee a day. It was really bad. It was
Dude,
really
those are
bad.
small. You gotta up those numbers. Yeah.
I drank like a hot coffee, and then I went to an iced coffee, and then I went back to a hot coffee.
That is journalism in itself, right?
It was literally journalism. I was staying up, writing stuff, and I was recording videos and doing all these other things, and then trying to have the time of my life in Toronto. And
it sounds like you did, though.
I did have the time. It was great. It was really incredible. I mean, I got to see a lot of really exciting films. I didn't see as many films that I didn't like, which was nice. I knew that I was going to come across some titles that I wasn't a fan of, but overall, I mean, I could say that I saw more winners than losers at TIFF, and man, I don't even know where to start. I saw a mix of practically everything. I saw Westerns, foreign films, comedies, dramas, musicals, action films, thrillers, romances. I saw a mix of everything. Animated films, I saw too much. And
really,
I saw
there was a big collection of animated films.
There was a big collection. Cool. There was a nice array of everything at this festival from countries from all over the globe in different languages. Some films were short as heck, and then some were incredibly lengthy. But that's to be expected when you go to a festival like this. And yeah, I'm really grateful that I had this opportunity with the outlet that I podcast for, and I really cannot stress enough still how shocked I am that I even went, because really at the start of this year, if you were to tell me at the start of 2023 that I was going to go to TIFF, I would have been like, that's not happening. There's no way. It would be great, but there's no way it's happening. And then it ended up happening, and it didn't really hit me that I was going until probably day 2 that I was there. Right. Like when I sat down for my second day, I'm like, I can't believe I'm actually here. It just feels so surreal and euphoric, and I'm so glad that I got to do it.
Well, yeah, tell them about your experience with just applying as press. And weren't you doing this for years? You were applying and just hoping to get in, right?
So I knew that getting into TIFF as press would be a little complicated if you weren't doing anything for an outlet. Sure. So in the last year, I've been podcasting for this very exciting outlet called The Rolling Tape, and we had made our first press accreditation with Tribeca earlier this year. And Tribeca is definitely an easier festival to get in because it's not as global as TIFF is. Like, TIFF is arguably one of the biggest festivals, not only in America, but just around the world. But yeah, we did press for Tribeca, and we pumped out a lot of great content out there. And we were like, you know what? Let's give Toronto a try. Let's just apply. It doesn't cost anything to apply. Why not give it a try and see what happens? And everyone kept on saying, oh, you're going to get in. You have a lot of coverage under your belt. You have a lot of good content under your sleeve, and you have a good follower account with the rolling tape. And I said, I don't know. We're a relatively new outlet, so we'll have to see. And me and one of my colleagues, we got to go, and I'm so over the moon that we got to do it. And I was nervous. I'm not going to lie. I was very nervous to do this. I didn't know how I was going to handle it if I didn't get in. But I always kept saying to myself, there'll be next year. This festival's not going anywhere. It will happen next year. And just the joy of getting in and just seeing that email. Yeah. It was a lot to take in. It was, I didn't even know how to process it. It's kind of equivalent to when I made this joke to one of my coworkers. I'm like, see, you just announced that you're having a child, and that's great and everything. But getting into Toronto is on the same level for me as it would be for you having the child.
That was your baby for a week. Yeah. It's 26 movies over and over again. Probably the same amount of sleep you actually
27
got,
actually, to correct you. 27.
27, sorry.
27.
But the same amount of sleep nonetheless. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I'm really happy because you were really working at that with podcasting and just, journalism in itself too. And that's good that you're plugged into a good outlet for that. So, but I want to get into the films now that you did see at the festival, and we're not going to go over all of them because there's not enough time.
That wouldn't be possible.
We would be here till 1 a.m. like you said. But I want you, and these don't have to be in order, to give me 5 of your favorites from the festival, and it doesn't have to be in order. Just tell me a little bit about the film, and then for our viewers, no spoilers yet. But yeah,
absolutely. I just have to pull up my letterbox just to see what I saw. I feel like I have to get a particular film that somebody on this show, actually multiple people on this show, talked about how excited they were to see it. Dream Scenario, which is a film starring Nicolas Cage, produced by Ari Aster, and it follows a professor that somehow has ended up in people's dreams. And that's all I'm going to tell you, because that's all you need to know walking into this movie. Now, if you're a fan of Nicolas Cage, you have to watch this movie, because Nicolas Cage is pretty incredible in this. And, when you think of Nicolas Cage, you think of very over-the-top, bonkers, zany entertainment. And there definitely is some of that bonkers to be found in Dream Scenario. But this surprisingly is more restrained than one would think. I certainly was taken aback by how restrained and laid back it was. It definitely got intense in certain parts. Not going to spoil anything here for anyone listening, but I really love the approach that this took on what it was discussing. And my letterbox review for this, my little letterbox entry, is honestly one of my favorites. Not to plug my letterbox or anything, but I don't want to spoil anything.
No,
but
drop your
the way that this is described on my letterbox is Nicolas Cage's Tar if it were a quasi-horror dramedy. There's horror elements, there's drama elements, and there's comedy elements too. And if you're a fan of the movie Tar, and if you are, thank God, because masterpiece. But there's so many directions that this film goes that you will absolutely not expect as soon as the movie begins. But if you're a fan of Nicolas Cage, it's a must-see. And I believe it's coming out at some point later this year. I did not get to go to the premiere of this, which really bummed me out because I waited in line for 2 hours to go online. In the rush line, I couldn't get a ticket for it. But I went to the press screen the following morning at like 8:30 in the morning. It was packed. And God, the adrenaline rush that I honestly needed. And it's also one of Nicolas Cage's most tender performances to date.
Really?
Like he's just, you feel so bad for the guy. I mean, he is just a schlubby professor who cares about his family and cares about his job. And then all of a sudden this thing happens to him, and it's not something that he wants, but he kind of slowly embraces it, and it takes a turn for the better or worse. Again, not going to spoil anything, but it really is a fantastic film. And I'm so glad I got to see it. It was definitely high up on my radar, but I wasn't sure if I was going to even be able to see it. And I'm really glad I did, because it ended up being one of my absolute favorites of the festival.
That's awesome. Was Nicolas Cage in your dreams afterwards? Was he also in there?
You know,
as a professor?
I'm not gonna lie. He definitely did appear in my dreams after I
I
saw
know.
this movie.
He already did for me, so that's okay. Well, give me a number 4. Like, or not these, like I said, not in order, but just
Right,
overall.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
So, ranked next on my list, is a film that I went into knowing literally nothing about, and it was a film that wasn't even on my radar to see, and that's a film called Saint Sane, which stars the always great Coleman Domingo. If you're a fan of Coleman Domingo, I mean, this is an acting showcase for him, and it's funny because he had 2 films that played at at Toronto. One of them being the biopic about Bayard Rustin, who was very pivotal in the March against Washington. And then this film, Saint Sane, it follows these prisoners from the Saint Sane facility in New York, and they are all putting it on the show because they're a part of this theater program. And the best thing that I could say about this movie is that it had my favorite ensemble from TIFF, because the interesting thing is with this film, and I didn't know this until walking out, but apparently everyone knew this walking in except for me. Other than Coleman Domingo, all the fellow prisoners in the movie were actually played by ex inmates of this facility.
Really?
They were playing themselves. They were graduates of this theater program in this facility. And you could just see that that added so much nuance and tenderness to the performance. It honestly made it feel more raw than you could have imagined, because
Really?
you weren't watching actors act. You think you were watching actors act, but instead you're watching these people who went through these struggles basically bring them back to life for us to watch. And it's a beautiful portrait of how art can heal you when you need something to heal you the most. All these people are broken in their own way. They're all going through their own struggles.
Mm.
And it's a really moving picture. And A24 actually just acquired the rights for this movie a few days ago at the time of this recording. And I'm so excited for everyone to see it, because this was a hidden gem at the festival. I went into it not knowing anything except for the fact that Coleman Domingo was in it. And it wasn't even on my list to see. But after hearing all the buzz about it throughout the festival, I'm like, I cannot leave Toronto without seeing this movie.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I did, because it ended up being one of my absolute favorites that I saw the entire festival. And it's going to be one of the most buzzed about titles when it finally hits theaters some point next year.
That just seems like a very original story, just like inmates bonding over their trauma, but through stage shows.
Yeah.
I'm reading about it
through
in
art,
Variety.
how art could bring people together.
Okay.
Everyone has
Yeah.
passions that help them feel whole when they feel down and broken and hopeless and lost. And the fact that theater is what brings these guys together, it's not so much a focus on the show, it's a focus on how these people share this bond and how they're able to open up and everything. And a lot of people talk about how there's a lot of movies where men don't really express their emotions. You watch this film and you throw that discussion out the window, because there are so many sequences where you just see these men open up and they're very vulnerable and they cry and they just, I mean, it really got to me more than I was expecting. Again, this wasn't even on my radar to see, but it's always fun when you go to film festivals like TIFF, to where you think you have your set schedule. It's always going to change, whether things open up or whether you decide you don't want to see the movie anymore. And the fact that this movie was so beloved and so celebrated throughout the entire festival, and the fact that I last minute added it to my schedule, that's saying a lot about how powerful this movie ended up being.
Okay. Because of the reception. And I think that's also something we don't see a lot often, is these very, like, this is the toughest group of people that we would probably consider in society, seasoned inmates and cons, and they're probably very hardcore, some of them very violent. So to see vulnerable masculinity coming from that type of place, I think that's really original. And I haven't seen much of that, only integrated here and there in movies and TV shows. But I think that's really nice that they're doing a take on that. And then, like you said, the bond through art and that nature. But what's your third pick?
My third pick is Anatomy of a Fall, which was
Ooh.
the first film that I saw at the festival. Great. What an uplifting film to start off TIFF with, because my God, happiest film I may have ever seen. So there was a lot of buzz surrounding this film because it won the highest prize at the Cannes Film Festival, the Palm. So naturally, of course, everyone was really excited to see this. And something that I gotta get off my chest about TIFF is that the way they schedule some of these movies, you would think that they would screen the buzziest titles a lot. They only screen this 3 times during the festival, 1 for press and 2 times for public in the first 2 days. So if you weren't in Toronto for that first few days, you weren't able to see.
So it's not scattered.
So it's not scattered.
Okay.
Like certain titles, like The Boy and the Heron from Hayao Miyazaki, they had screens for that almost every single day.
Oh.
And with Anatomy of a Fall, I love courtroom dramas. I love slow burn thrillers, and I didn't watch the trailer prior to walking into this movie. I wanted to go into this as blind as possible. I knew the basics of it. It's about a woman that's accused of killing her husband, and everything that goes down in her personal life with her son and her friends and everybody surrounding her. And considering that she is a public figure, I just, the way that they go about presenting this movie and really painting a picture on this woman and not telling you if she is guilty or not, that's something that I have to give a major round of applause to the filmmakers behind this film for. I really was worried that I was going to walk out of this movie being like, that was good, but it was very overhyped. Because naturally, when you walk into a movie that has so much buzz, you always have to learn to tamper your expectations, because you don't want to be that one guy that walks out the movie and says, that wasn't good, that was disappointing, I don't get the hype surrounding it.
Sure.
And at first, I'm not going to lie, it took me a little while to get into the movie. I was interested in it, but I wasn't fully there. But then something happens later on. I'm, again, not going to spoil it. I want everyone to go in knowing as little as possible with this movie. But it made me shift
like
my opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was insane the places that they went to with this movie. And it's long. It's 2.5 hours. It does go slow. It's not exactly the most exciting movie out there, but it's worth watching specifically for the performances. The writing is exceptional. A lot of people are specifically referring to Sandra Hüller's performance as the thing to talk about with this movie, and she is unbelievable, and I really hope that she does get some love this award season. I'm not some guy that likes to predict the Oscars super early on, but I really do hope that she has the chance of getting at least a nomination. But the writing is so good because, again, it paints these characters as real people. You're not watching characters, you're watching actual people in front of your eyes. And even though this isn't a real story and these aren't real people, I felt like I was watching real people in front of my eyes. And the courtroom scenes are engaging. Everything that happens outside the courtroom is compelling. The family drama is wonderful. There's some comedy incorporated in here that felt very earnest. And whenever you watch a movie like this and there's comedy injected into it, it can feel so jarring and out of place. Thankfully, though, the writing allows the comedy to help breathe everything that's going on, to cool down all the tension that's going on around these characters. And Anatomy of a Fall, I mean, it really lived up to the hype, and I was so worried that it wasn't. And I'm really glad that this was the first film that I saw at the festival, because I knew that when they were press screening this early in the morning, a part of me was dreading watching a 2.5 hour long movie at 8:30 in the morning, especially, the morning after I got to Toronto. I was tired, I was exhausted, but I love the movie so much, and I'd be shocked if it doesn't stay in my top 10 of the year. It's that good.
Really?
And I know that you plan on seeing this at some point in a
I would
couple
love
of weeks.
to see it. I was also going to ask, do you think it's in the same realm of how Parasite penetrated into being in the Oscars and in the Best Picture category? Do you think it could have a chance in that?
I don't think it's going to be on the same level of success as Parasite, but I do see it being a potential strong contender in terms of the international features. I could see this definitely getting in for international feature. I believe at the time of this recording, we don't know what France is submitting as their selection. And it would be very shocking if this wasn't that film. But even if that's the case, because a lot of the film is in English, I feel like this is still going to do super well at the awards, because Neon is behind it. Neon knows how to campaign a movie. I mean, after what they did with Parasite, I mean, the possibilities are endless for the studio. So I definitely feel that this will be a strong contender. Do I think it's going to get like bunch of Oscar nominations, like 8 or 9, probably not,
Yeah.
but I definitely could see it being in picture. Sandra Hoover for actress, the screenplay, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would be, if it doesn't get an international feature nomination, I would be very happy if it does get those 3 nominations that I just listed, because it really is some of the best work that you will see from a writing standpoint, from an acting standpoint. It just straight up, it's one of the best films of the year so far, and it probably will end up being in my top 10 when the year's done.
Yeah, I feel like also if Parasite hadn't gotten all those accolades and all of those laurels, it wouldn't take away from the quality that is that film. And I think that Anatomy of a Fall is in that same category of, it doesn't need the awards to validate its quality and its storytelling. So not that I expect it to get any Oscars, but it would be nice to have another series of foreign films into the best pictures. Just because I think there have been some years that the best picture nominations have been lacking, at least maybe not everyone. But out of, I think it's 10 films now.
Mm-hmm.
So not all of those 10 films have been great every single year.
That's bound to happen.
Yeah, which is okay. But if you can give that spot to a film like, Parasite, which it deserved it that year, and then a foreign film like Anatomy of the Fall, like, I would campaign for that too. So I hope that the Academy recognizes it in some way. But give me a number 2.
Number 2 is Richard Linklater's Hitman, which is another film that I was anticipating to see because I'm a huge fan of Richard Linklater. I love a lot of his films, and I do love when he decides to step out of his comfort zone to do something that doesn't feel very Richard Linklater-y. And when you find out that he's doing some action comedy, you're like, this doesn't sound like the guy who made the Before trilogy or Boyhood or Days of Confused or even School of Rock. But then you watch this film, and it's honestly the best that he's done in years. The last time that he made a film that I thought was genuinely great was probably Boyhood from almost a decade ago. And here he is doing something that's very high octane, fast paced, super sleek, but also incredibly sexy. And let me tell you something about this movie.
Wow.
So anyone listening, if you're a fan of Glenn Powell, I mean, I am too, but they try to do the thing that a lot of these movies try to do, where they try to make someone who's conventionally very hot to be not hot, and it doesn't work at all. They try to give him the glasses, the long hair, and all the button shirts. I'm like, this doesn't work at all, because you know what? You look at him and he could still kind of get it. I'm not gonna lie. I wouldn't say no if he comes up to me like that. I'm just expressing the truth. I would not say no if he comes up, but this was so much fun. This was a truly entertaining film, and seeing this with a crowd at Toronto made me go, I'm so excited to be here. I went to the North American premiere of it. It premiered at Venice to so much acclaim. A lot of people were walking out of Hitman celebrating and being like, that was a genuinely great movie. And I'm like, I mean, I expected it to be good and entertaining, but great movie? That's kind of a surprise, and my expectations skyrocketed. Then I sat down and I watched the movie, and I walked out of it going, that was way better than it had any right to be. It's so quick. It's so entertaining. It's a hybrid action, noir, rom-com, and Glenn Powell is so good in this. I love that he's able to showcase the charisma that he has brought to quite a few films these last few years. There was a period where Glenn Powell was kind of gone, and then Top Gun Maverick kind of brought him back to the spotlight.
Oh, yeah.
And now a lot of people want to work with Glenn Powell, and he's great in this. The comedy here is razor sharp. It's so freaking funny. It's the funniest that Linklater has been in a long time.
Really?
But there's also a very great romance between Glenn Powell and, I don't remember the woman's name.
Adria or Jonah. I got it right in front of me. Yeah.
That's her. That's the name. Couldn't have said it better than me. But they're so good together, and it's a very steamy romance. And Richard Linklater, you think of Richard Linklater, sure, he's done romances before, but like nothing that's like sexy or steamy or like a lot of emotions riding through you when you're watching this. You're just like fanning yourself when you're watching. You're like, oh, Richard Linklater, my God, simmer down a little bit, please.
Do you think it's like Mr. and Mrs. Smith at all?
It kind of gives off a bit of Mr. and Mrs. Smith vibes, even though they're not a couple, these two. So basically, Glenn Powell, he's a college professor who has a part-time gig as an undercover cop, but then he ends up going undercover as a hitman, and it's just
Wow.
it's just as silly as it sounds.
That's
You
wild.
hear that premise and you're like, oh, that sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but it embraces that ridiculousness. It's just so smart and clever. I haven't seen a comedy this sharp in a really long time.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that when people do end up seeing it, a lot of audiences are going to be head over heels in love with it. Just today, actually a couple of hours ago, Netflix bought the rights for $20 million. And,
Really?
you know, I'm happy that someone finally picked it up, because when this premiered at Venice and there was no distributor, I'm like, something obviously has to be up. Like, there must be a major bid and work going on, and that definitely seems to be the case. $20 million for this movie, that's a major win for the film itself.
Oh, absolutely.
But Netflix picking it up definitely worries me a bit, because you tend to get some films that are too good for Netflix. Like a film like The Irishman, even though Netflix financed that film themselves and they were willing to be the only people that gave Scorsese the money that he needed to bring that film to life, I feel like it just came and went. Like, it didn't have a proper theatrical run. It got dumped on Netflix, and then not many people watched it.
Because of the runtime, too.
People complained about the 3.5-hour runtime when these are the same people who watch all 10 episodes of Stranger Things in one sitting. So, you know, I don't want to hear people being like, oh, how could you watch 7 movies in one day? Well, how could you watch 10 episodes of Stranger Things in one sitting? That's like 13 hours of something.
Yeah, it's like half the time. Yeah,
exactly. But I'm glad that somebody picked up Hitman, and I do think that this is going to bode well with mainstream audiences. Mainstream audiences are going to log on to Netflix. They're going to see a movie called Hitman. They're going to see Glenn Powell's, and they're going to be like, oh, Glenn Powell, yeah, he's hot and everything. But then they watch the movie and they'll be pleasantly surprised. So I'm happy that someone finally picked it up, but I do hope it's a scenario to where Netflix gives it the proper attention that it deserves. It's not going to be some major Oscar player. Netflix has a lot of those this year. Maestro, May, December.
Yeah.
But I really hope from the bottom of my heart, as someone who really appreciates seeing this film with an audience, that other people get to experience that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, too, I think it's a good point that you brought up Netflix, because they, at least lately, have been commercializing a lot of their content. Like, there was even the movie The Gray Man with Ryan Gosling and Anna de Armas, and all these people, and that was like one of their biggest budget films.
It was their most expensive film.
Yeah, to date.
Similar to that Red Notice film that had The Rock and Ryan Reynolds. That was also like a big money juggernaut for them.
And you wonder, like, you know, they have the budget to back these up, but not necessarily did it deliver in its storytelling. And, you know, for an action movie, too, the Russo brothers were also attached to it, so they know what they're doing when they're making an action movie. So they have the stars and the cast, or the stars and the directors. And, you know, it just feels like they have been desensitizing a lot of their material, or just, you know, having, I don't know, the quality has just really declined for me personally.
No, it really has.
Same with Maestro, looks like separate.
Maestro looks very separate. You wouldn't even think that this is the same studio that pumps out all the like Kissing Booth movies or Enola Holmes or whatever. But, you know, it is nice that every once in a while Netflix does take a liking towards these buzzier titles that will get them some awards attention. I mean, you look at something like Roma from a few years ago. That was a huge success for Netflix in terms of awards. And then they had The Irishman, Marriage Story, Trial of Chicago 7, Power of the Dog they had. I don't remember they had a big title last year, but
there's like an art house version of Netflix.
There is.
It's really funny
you would
when
never
you put
think
it that
that
way.
it's the same people. Oh, Glass Onion they had last year. Glass Onion,
that was commercialized,
and that was very commercialized,
especially
to the point where they decided, oh, we're gonna have a theatrical run. It's gonna be short, but we're gonna give people the opportunity to go see this in theaters, and it did very well for them. It made a really good amount of money, and honestly, if they had kept it in theaters longer, I bet you more people would have gone out to see it.
Right, and I think it's like, especially Glass Onion, that was a really glazed over version of the first Knives Out. Like a lot of the unique. I don't know if that's like, a lot of it was dependent on the script between Rian Johnson and the production. Daniel Craig was still pretty good in that movie, but I felt like the story overall was really like all over the place. So compared to the first one, and then the first Knives Out had so much success and being so original, like who done it again. I feel like them making, weren't they in for 2 and 3? Like they called in Ryan Johnson for like, we're gonna make 2 more with you at
Yeah,
Netflix.
Netflix signed this really big deal where they acquired 2 Knives Out sequels for like like
Absurd
$400 million.
Yeah.
It was a huge acquisition, and Netflix gave Ryan Johnson the budget that he needed for not Glass Onion. They haven't started doing the third Knives Out yet, but and you could definitely sense that the budget was way bigger with Glass Onion because it looked so much glossier than that first film, which looked a bit darker and everything. And I do like how they're two very separate films. They don't rely on one another. They just happen to have the same character as the lead, which is great. But it is unfortunate that you see Netflix putting so much effort into promoting one project, but then they push aside the project that actually deserves the attention. So I'm so worried that with Hitman, they acquired it. They're gonna do very little promotion for it. They're not gonna give it a proper theatrical run, and then it's just gonna be dumped on the service, and then no one's gonna talk about it again.
I almost felt the same way too with Fincher's The Killer, which I was like, this is David Fincher. That's
another big title.
And I felt that way with Mank. Mank was like very unique. I couldn't tell what that. I think it was very separate from Fincher's other works. Obviously, it was a period piece, and they made the audio sound like 1940s audio.
It was a very different you wouldn't think of Fincher as someone who would direct a movie like Mank.
Yeah, and there was yet still a commercial element to it as a Netflix film, and I think that movie didn't get a theatrical release as well either.
It came out during the height of COVID, so it was hard for it to get a proper theatrical run. But it still ended up being a major awards contender. It got a lot of award buzz. It got a lot of nominations and everything. But even still, it's like David Fincher, one of the most celebrated filmmakers working today, no one wanted to give him the money for that film. So instead, Netflix decided we're going to give him the money for this, which was great on Netflix's part. But at the same time, it would be nice if they put more dedication towards those projects like they do with a lot of their shows and some of their movie franchises.
Yeah. I did see one thing that I was actually applauding them for was they were investing, I think it was almost $1 billion in just South Korean entertainment as a whole. So after the success of Squid Game, they want to really get into more showcasing of South Korean content. But after our tangent on Hitman being acquired by Netflix, I think we're gonna get into your number one pick.
Yes.
So, tell me about that.
Yeah. So my favorite film that I saw at TIFF was actually the one I was most excited to see. I'm a huge fan of the filmmaker behind this film, and I have happily defended most of his films, but his last film was not very good. My favorite film of the festival was The Holdovers from Alexander Payne, starring Paul Giamatti. I love Alexander Payne. He is honestly a filmmaker that I may respect more than other people. Sideways is really in contention to maybe being my favorite film ever made. I know I brought up before Catch You If You Can is my favorite, but Sideways is like right there. It's very close. It's very close. And then Election is great. The Descendants is great. Nebraska is great. Unfortunately, can't say the same thing about Downsizing because that was not a win for Alexander Payne, and it's unfortunate because lots of potential behind that one, and it turned out to be a massive dud. So I was worried that his first film since that was going to be worse than that, but there's only one place to go, and that's up.
Okay.
You can't go down with that. And thankfully he went up, and The Holdovers is a really beautiful film. It's so moving. It's so tender. It's a great balance of comedy and drama. Something that Alexander Payne is always so good with. It's very hard to balance comedy and drama and blush it into one. But the fact that he's able to do it so successfully is saying so much of his craft as a filmmaker. He usually writes his films, but this was one of the few times where he just directed. And the directing here is so subtle and earnest and honest, and the screenplay is wonderful too. These are characters that are very, very broken, and very lost with so much going on. They're all going through their own struggles,
Mm.
but the movie does a great job of painting them as not perfect people. And that's the case with a lot of Alexander Payne's movies. His main characters tend to be very flawed individuals. In The Descendants with George Clooney's character, he's a very flawed guy. Yes, someone likable like George Clooney is playing this character, but the character that he plays is incredibly flawed. Nebraska, Bruce Stern's character, super flawed. Election, Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon, very flawed people. And then in Sideways, Paul Giamatti's character is just as flawed as you could possibly imagine. That's the case here. They reunite after 20 years of not having worked together, and Paul Giamatti is extraordinary here. It's an unbelievably good performance. It's one of the best of the year. But the performance that I think everybody should be talking about is this kid, Dominic Sessa. This was his first time acting.
Really?
Alexander Payne found him at just some school, just acting.
Wow.
And you watch the movie, you would not guess for a second that this is this kid's first movie. You would not think, and he's acting alongside someone giants like Paul Giamatti, someone who's very experienced and well trained.
Oh, yeah.
And this kid was unbelievable, and there was so much development towards him. And I know that the Academy has a tendency of not recognizing performances from younger people, but I firmly believe if the cards are played right and the studio campaigns the crap out of this movie, I think this Dominic Sessa kid could sneak into the Best Supporting Actor race and get a nomination. It would be a very deserving one for sure. And the chemistry between him and Paul Giamatti is wonderful. And the aesthetic of this movie, too, is something that I think you're going to appreciate because it's set in the 70s. It feels like a movie from the 70s. The way it opens up, it's super grainy. The neo drops throughout the movie are incredible. And it just feels so vintage. It feels like it was dug up in a capsule that was buried in the 70s and now it's coming out to life in 2023. And it is also a future Christmas classic. It's set during Christmas, and we all love Christmas movies, but this is definitely going to be a yearly Christmas watch.
So this is going to be like in the rivalry of Die Hard being a Christmas movie, you know, like this is going to be set around Christmas.
It's set around Christmas. Christmas plays more of a pivotal part of the story than
Die Hard.
Than it does in Die Hard. But no, it's really incredible. It got so much acclaim out of the Telluride Film Festival, which happened right before TIFF. And this was actually second place to win the People's Choice Award at TIFF. People's Choice, for anyone who doesn't know, is like the equivalent of Best Picture at the Toronto Film Festival.
Really?
And The Holdovers was actually the runner-up to win the award. It was very close. It was a very well-respected film at the festival. Everyone was just buzzing and glowing about it. Practically everybody that I knew that saw it loved it. I hadn't met anybody that didn't at least like the movie, and that's saying a lot concerning that. Again, Alexander Payne is coming off a film that disappointed critics and audiences and longtime fans of his work, just like myself. So for The Holdovers to be a return to form to him is so exciting, and you could just see how great he is as a director, because a lot of the movies you see him as a great writer and a director, but this is a showcase of him just as a director, and it's really some of the best work that he's ever done.
Yeah.
It's really terrific, and I cannot stress enough how wonderful this film is. It's right now, it's in my top 5 of the year. I don't see it leaving the top 5, and I don't want to oversell it or overhype the movie for anyone listening, but it genuinely is a crowd pleaser. People are going to walk out of this movie just so moved by it. They're going to laugh a lot. They're going to cry. Paul Giamatti says some things that I don't even know who wrote this script, but I'm just like, how could someone come up with this? This is just genius work, and it's so good. It follows these lonely people, and it's really beautiful. It just moved me so much. I laughed 1 minute, then I cried the next. It was my absolute favorite film that I saw at TIFF.
That's really cool. I immediately when I saw the trailer, I like going back to what you were saying about how vintage it looked, and I loved the aesthetic that they brought to it. Of like you said, like they dug. It looks like they dug up a film canister, and this movie was just forgotten about, and it was from the 1970s. That's how accurate they nailed the look and the feel of it.
They nail it too with the transitions and the cuts and the pans and everything. You genuinely feel like you're watching a film from the 70s. You forget that this movie was made in 2023.
That's awesome. And I feel like that'll be a bigger appreciation for anyone who grew up in that time period and might go see the film. And then from the trailer too, I felt like my first impression was, this feels like a 70s version of Dead Poets Society, but
Absolutely.
they're more damaged, and Mr. Keating isn't as inspirational. He's, Paul Giamatti is a titan in his own right, and I've always loved his work, and I think he's still one of the most underappreciated actors.
He absolutely
right now.
is. It's time that we really give Paul Giamatti the recognition that some of these other actors get. Like Paul Giamatti, he's always a great presence in anything that he's in, whether he's the lead or the supporting. But whenever he's the lead in anything, that's where his best work is showcased. And the fact that this was his movie, but sharing the screen with Dominic Sessa and also Divine Joy Randolph, who's unbelievably good here as well. It's nice to know that Alexander Payne and Paul Giamatti, when they work together, it's literal magic. And they've only done 2 movies together.
That's great.
And it's equivalent to kind of like Scorsese and DiCaprio when they work together. It just gave me that vibe of one of the best director-actor pairings that I've ever seen.
That's really cool. And for anyone who's interested, it has so far from early reviews an 8.1 on IMDb and a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I'm going to take Brian's word for it and everyone else's word for it on just the quality of this film. And I'm really excited for this. I think this is going to be one of my favorite watches.
Yeah, I can't see you not at least liking it. And I could definitely see you being over the moon about it, just like me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited about that. And then so I've been hearing a lot of buzz in a negative way from Toronto about Chris Pine's directorial debut, to the point where people have literally walked out and have also just written some of like the straightest, like cutthroat headlines that I've seen in recent media, like of any movie review, which I was blown away by. Like so give me your take on Pool Man. I have nothing about this film, so just tell me about it. Yeah.
Oh man, I don't even know where to begin with this one. So like when they announced that Chris Pine's directorial debut was coming to Toronto, I was really excited. I love Chris Pine. I stand by saying that he is the best Chris in the industry. I know that's up for discussion, but I knew that reaction was coming, but I love Chris Pine. I just think he's so likable and charismatic, and I love that he does a mix of everything: comedy, drama, musicals. He was Captain Kirk, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
And I thought the idea of his directorial debut sounded like a good time. It sounded ridiculous, but it sounded like a movie that was so bad that it was going to be entertaining. And it was so bad that it was just so bad. And when I went to the premiere screen, I went to the world premiere screening of this, so there were no reactions to this prior. No one had seen the movie, so I had no idea how people were feeling about this. The screen was packed. It was full. It was right after I saw another movie with the word man in the title. I saw Hitman, and then I directly went to go see this right afterwards. There were about, I would say, maybe 500 people in the theater when the movie started.
Okay. So pretty big attendance. Yeah.
Pretty big attendance. And then about halfway through the movie, I noticed that the seats were getting empty. They were getting very empty.
Oh, no.
And then by the time the movie ended, I would say about a little more than half of that theater was empty. I had seen over 20 films at that point. That was on my second to last day of the festival. And I'm sure that there were people that walked out of some movies while I was there. But this number of walkouts genuinely caught me off guard.
Wow.
And then I said to myself, you know what, though? I don't blame them because the movie kind of sucked. And it's disappointing because there actually was a lot of potential, because on top of Chris Pine directing it and also acting in it, there was a really great ensemble here. I mean, the cast for this is very stacked. You have Annette Bening, you have Jennifer Jason Leigh, you have Danny DeVito, for goodness sakes.
Really?
The cast here is massive. It's stacked, and it's supposed to be a spin on Chinatown.
Okay.
Kind of mixed with The Big Lebowski. So if you love Chinatown, I mean, the movie literally just plays out as a Chinatown wannabe. Chris Pine plays this pool man, and then this mystery happens and everything. And I don't want to go into spoilers with it, but I was genuinely shocked by how dull this movie was, but also, and more importantly, it was so incredibly unfunny. And these are really funny people in the movie, but there were so many jokes that I'm just like,
Stale.
well,
Yeah.
that didn't land at all, Chris. I don't know what you're trying to do, buddy. And it's unfortunate. And I said this to my friends who came with me to the screening. I think Chris Pine might have lost the title for the best Chris.
I was gonna say
after this movie.
This doesn't sound very reassuring.
It's
him.
really sad because you could tell that he poured a lot of heart into this movie, and you could tell that he was excited to make this movie. Now, he wasn't there promoting the movie, even though he was directing it. He was not there because he wanted to stand in solidarity with his fellow actors and writers and everything. But had he been there, oh man, that would have been really bad. Wow. And there was a Q&A with the producer right afterwards, but I had already walked out when the movie was done. I left, and I felt I low key felt bad. I felt really bad, but this film was just so disastrous, and it's disappointing because even though it sounded so goofy, it sounded like it was going to be a fun time. Mm-hmm. And usually when you go to film festivals, you don't want to just see all these Oscar baity acclaimed movies. You want to see something that's entertaining. Like I had just seen Hitman, and that was a fun time. That was a great time, actually. Yeah. But then to go from that to Pool Man, which was my least favorite thing that I saw at TIFF, it broke my heart. It really did. And you know, after the movie ended, there was a part of me that was like, wonder if I'm the only one that didn't like it. But then when I realized that there was so many walk-ins, I'm like, well, obviously I'm not the only one who didn't dig it. And then the following morning, I go on Twitter and I see all these reactions. Chris Pine's directorial debut, disastrous, terrible debut. Chris Pine might have lost the title for the best Chris. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm not the only one who felt that way. And thank God. And I had to tell people who were trying to go to the press screening the following morning, I'm like, do not go see Pool Man. Don't go see Pool Man. Save yourself. Go see something else. And they're like, no, but I want to see Pool Man to support Chris Pine. And I'm like, well, if you want to go see Pool Man, just wait for whenever it comes out. Okay. Man, I mean, I was hoping that we wouldn't talk about Pool Man. I was hoping that we would only talk about Pool Man. I was hoping that we would only talk about the winners today, but
oh no, we needed that because of just the headlines alone.
I know. You're not the only one who's asked me about Pool Man. Everyone's been like, "Was Pool Man that bad?" And I'm like, "Yes."
Well, I mean, it sounds like you still got a lot of great festival notable picks, and I mean, just the fact that you were able to go experience this and sit down, even though that all the celebrities and the directors weren't there, it's still a pretty fulfilling experience. And, you know, is this a festival that you would recommend over other ones, or like as your top one that you would say?
Oh, absolutely. Because at this festival, you get a mix of all these big profile titles, but then you also get a lot of these super small titles that have little to no buzz, and just these filmmakers trying to get their voices discovered and everything. Toronto is a great city. I highly recommend everyone go to it, but also just the energy that's there throughout this entire film festival is so apparent. Like everyone gets so excited. People applaud before the movies begin. There's all these cool commercials that happen beforehand that the people at TIFF put together. It's really incredible. The vibes there are just unlike anything that you will ever see at any other film festival. Wow. And I haven't been to every single one, obviously. There's still so many that I would love to cross on my bucket list. Sundance being one of them. I want to go to Cannes. I want to go to Venice. I want to go to South by Southwest. But TIFF really might be the best one. And to everyone I've talked to that have gone to most of the festivals, a lot of them unanimously agree that TIFF is their favorite one. Just the energy there is unlike anything, and just the vibes, and it's so relaxed and it's so calm. Even though it's a very packed film festival, you're walking around King Street, which is in downtown Toronto, and you're just packed like sardines, and you're moving around and everything. But it's a really wonderful festival, and I highly recommend that if anyone ever has the opportunity to go, definitely put it on your list. It may be a bit pricey, but it's worth every single penny.
That's awesome, man. Well, thank you for coming in. And
thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, thank you for talking about all of your experience. And we'll try and get there with you whenever we can, too. And we'll
absolutely.
Be right there.
We'd love you guys to be there, too.
Yeah. But, yeah, thanks again. Everybody also check out Bryan's podcast, Film Fragments, and The Rolling Tape, his outlet that he's covering films and journalism with. But this is the Cinema Wave Media Podcast. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It is at Cinema Wave Media. And then be sure to follow our main network page, _ Culture Wave Media Network. And we will see you next time. Thanks again for tuning in.